Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks a lot for joining us. We're going to give just a couple of minutes to wait for more people that are still joining, and then we're going to start. All right, let's start this morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Mariano Castro, and I support the work on protected and conserved areas at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. We're really happy that you were able to join this session of the Target 3 Community of Practice. This is a community that has been led together with our colleagues from the WCPA, the World Commission on Protected Areas. And we have Brent here representing WCPA. And basically, we aim to connect practitioners and partners and parties and other relevant stakeholders working to advance on the implementation of Target 3. We also want to thank the support provided by GIZ and the Japan Biodiversity Fund to strengthen this community. And we're really happy because today we have an amazing panel, and we will be talking about how to move from the designation to effective implementation in marine protected areas. And we have a good set of experts that are going to be sharing practical cases and how to scale up this work that is essential. We know that we not only need to focus on coverage, and in order to be able to also implement Target 3, ensuring that all the qualitative elements are achievable, we need adequate finance. We also really look forward to having a nice discussion and a participatory session. So please do share any questions that you may have on the chat. I'm gonna hand over to Magdalena, and I will be looking at the chat in case you guys have any comments or questions. And yeah, thank you so much. Welcome all the panelists, and we look forward to a nice discussion this morning. Magdalena, over to you.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon. Well, as Mariano said, this webinar is part of a series of webinars we have been organizing with the WCPA, with Brent, with Mariano, and in this case, with the support of the GIZ and the Japan Biodiversity Fund. As Mariano said, today we have amazing speakers on this webinar on financing the effective implementation of marine protected areas under Target 3. That they will be sharing experiences, cases, like tools. So we have Sarah Wyatt from the GEF, Patricia Leon from the Bezos Earth Fund, Maximiliano Sepúlveda and Neil Inandar from Pew. And then we will have a period of Q&As, questions and answers. So I will be copying the agenda in the chat. So please write your questions so we can have a nice discussion afterward. So I will start introducing Sarah. Sarah Wyatt is a senior biodiversity specialist at the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, where she works with biodiversity projects in Latin America and Pacific Island on the GEF engagement with indigenous people and local communities. Sarah has had various roles at the GEF for the past 13 years. Prior to the GEF, she was a Fulbright scholar in Costa Rica and worked at Conservation International and IUCN. She has a master in environmental science from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and a bachelor in biology and government from the College of William and Mary. It's my pleasure to give the floor to Sarah.
Thank you so much. Let me just get my presentation up and hopefully we are going to be moving along. And it's okay, slideshow. There we go. I just want to double check. All good? You can hear me? Presentation's up. Okay.
Yes.
Maximiliano nodding. Thank you. So thank you so much for having the Jeff and inviting the Jeff to present. And I'm going to talk about our support, a little bit of history about our support or past with MPAs, as well as reflecting on some lessons and what the opportunities are for the future. So the Jeff is the largest multilateral funder of marine protected areas in general, as well as marine protected areas. We serve as the financial mechanism for the CBD, which I guess we have some folks on here from the WCPA who might not be as familiar with that role, but that is why we exist along with the other conventions. That's why we're here talking about our work with protected areas. Marine and coastal biodiversity is not just a priority for our biodiversity focal area, but is also important to our international waters focal area. So we actually have two areas that we work on. We're also the financial mechanism or part of the financial mechanism for the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction agreement, or kind of the High Seas Treaty. And so we have kind of multiple ways that we get at biodiversity as an issue, and marine biodiversity specifically. Now, the Jeff was designed to cover the incremental cost of global environmental benefits. So really that means, there is this cost that's borne by the people who are protecting biodiversity. Oftentimes there's a lot of local benefit to what you do. We would often talk about kind of the benefits of a marine protected area long-term for increased fish size and fish production. So that will be local benefit. But then we also know that a lot of times the cost of protecting biodiversity is often pushed onto some of those who are least able to afford it. And so the Jeff is meant to try to do something to make up that difference a little bit. So the Jeff supports, I would say, the full gamut of MPA and generally marine and coastal biodiversity protection. So everything from supporting the creation and expansion of marine protected areas, working on questions of management effectiveness. So we don't just make a nice looking protected area and have a paper park that's not actually enforced, which is a huge challenge for many of the marine protected areas out there. And so that the Jeff is also there to support that. And, we don't only need to make new protected areas. Actually, I'm often really excited to see projects that are just focusing on getting existing protected areas into good shape as well. We will help with policy and regulatory reform. We know that oftentimes there's a lot of incoherence in policy. At a national level, you have fisheries subsidies for fuel, for other things for fisheries that kind of work counter to ostensibly the same goals that are out there to protect marine biodiversity. And so we see that in a lot of places, and we in particular are very interested in focusing on this area. It's a hard area to work on, admittedly, right? Because fisheries lobbies or fisheries ministries can be quite powerful in many countries. And so we know that it's a hard thing to do, but also kind of want to be there. Also, under that, you would talk about things like community co-management of protected areas and rights-based fisheries management, working with Indigenous peoples and local communities, protecting their fisheries and their management of those fisheries. And just to note that overall, we don't have a position saying, oh, your marine protected areas have to be no take. The evidence is that take or no take is not necessarily the measure of whether or not an area is effectively managed. And so, we are fairly flexible in what that involves. One of the other things that the JEF has really focused on is ensuring the long-term financial sustainability of protected area systems. That could be things like conservation trust funds, payments for ecosystem services, using, say, ecotourism revenue back into protected area management, doing, as I said, kind of fisheries management, taxes, tourism as another example, or other forms of blended financial instruments. And actually, we have some good examples out of the marine sector in that. So that's actually where potentially some of the resources, there's meant to be a reflow that can, depending on how that's done at the JEF, that can be done so that actually the money isn't necessarily coming back to the JEF, but it's used to continue the program and have a greater impact than if you were just kind of working on a purely grant-based focus. The other thing that's quite important in this area when it comes to how the JEF works is regional and transboundary programs. So developing multi-country approaches for shared ecosystems. We work with the large marine ecosystem kind of modality or approach to understanding the different, various ecosystems, or how do you organize this way. So we've provided a lot of support, particularly through our International Waters program, to have projects there. So I often get a lot of questions. How do you actually get money out of the JEF? And I've heard of the JEF, and what is this? So here is my short version. These steps are not necessarily precisely have to be done in this order, but we'll do that for organization's sake. So step one, find out who your operational focal point is. If you Google JEF and then a country name, you will find the country page on the JEF website, and there you can find the operational focal point. And that is the person in the end who has to sign off on any JEF projects that are going to be undertaken in your country. They're really the kind of decider in this context. And so it's good to know who that person is and know how to approach them and build that relationship. You might also look at what is the right modality or type of project that you want to put together. We have what are standalone projects. They may be national or multi-country projects. We also have integrated programs, such as a Blue and Green Islands integrated program that include this topic. We have multi-country programs and projects. We also have the JEF Small Grants program that many of you may also be familiar with. And that's operated at a national level. So again, you can find the national coordinator. That's a different person, but really focused on community-based organizations and civil society implementing marine protected areas and many other things under the JEF. Make sure as you're developing your proposal that this is aligned with your NBSAP and with ideally the KMGBF 30 by 30 target, but many other things within KMGBF. So understanding where you fit within that and trying to link some of your indicators, the indicator framework, as you pull together the project will really help you in terms of kind of moving smoothly through the JEF process. You need to have a JEF implementing agency. So the JEF works with a partnership of 18 implementing agencies. Some of them are listed here: UNDP, UNEP, FAO, the World Bank, Regional Development Banks, WWF, Conservation International, IUCN, particularly relevant for this topic. They are kind of your way into the JEF. They have a JEF unit. They have resources to support the development of project concepts, which is step 5. You have to have a PIF or a project identification form, or in the case of the GBFF, so the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, which is also housed at the JEF, and this is all quite relevant for, it's called a PPG request. But either way, it's a concept of what you want to do. The JEF implementing agency is a good partner for working on that. and they will know about the process. And as I said, they actually have resources for that. A big note that I'm going to put at the bottom is often I get asked, and they say, oh, we need Jeff funding. Well, we're part of this initiative or that initiative, or we've done this thing, but we don't get any money from the Jeff. And I just want to point out that oftentimes, because the Jeff is 100 people in Washington, D.C., we are not involved in every project everywhere. So our money often goes through other initiatives like the Blue Nature Alliance and other things. So I'm just noting that. I'm somewhat aware of the time, so I'm trying to now move quickly, but I'll just say, I'll try to be very quick here. Try to think about your long-term plans for marine protected areas and see where the Jeff and other funders that you're going to hear from now can slot into that, but have your plan and be focused in how you want to approach it, and have it try to be a long-term plan. What is your long-term vision? The Jeff can actually help support you developing that, but think about us as one piece in that puzzle. You need to have community engagement, and they're often highly effective in managing that. You need to be thinking about financial sustainability. Marine protected areas require significant resources to work effectively, and the Jeff money does not last forever. So trying to set up these mechanisms. We need to try to keep our monitoring frameworks realistic, our approaches realistic, and know that things take time. I'm just going to summarize it with that. And then, so just to note and kind of look a little bit ahead, marine protected areas are very much a part of Jeff 9 and the strategy that is currently under negotiation for Jeff 9. And I'd say the programming directions is quite close, like what we will fund and how we'll fund it is quite close to where it'll probably end up. No guarantees there. It's still under negotiation. I'm not prejudging anything. And the other note is that the Jeff, while we're small, we're here. We want to help you reach ambitious goals on marine protected areas. And so reach out to the Jeff team. We have regional teams as well as our focal area teams that can talk some ideas through with you and what might be possible with Jeff resources. We, as I'm noting below, we have some other areas that can also, beyond biodiversity, that fund marine protected areas quite often. International waters is one example. And international waters, while it's their international or regional program, multi-country programs, we really need national champions often to help those things move forward and push forward good ideas to kind of galvanize people behind them. I'll also note that we have resources for adaptation for LDCs and SIDS. And quite often, actually, marine protected areas are a piece of that, maybe because I see the SIDS projects. But there's a real role and an importance in how marine protected areas and kind of the fisheries sector broadly is managed for adaptation and for biodiversity. And these things can work quite well together. As well as we'll have an expanded non-grant instrument. And I think fisheries and marine protected areas actually both are opportunities to work in that space. So that's kind of my very quick overview. I'm trying to be mindful of time, so I will hand it back over to Magdalena.
Hi. Thank you so much, Sarah. Great presentation. Impressive the scope of the Jeff that goes from the designing to the implementation. Also interesting to learn about that the GEF is also working with supporting projects on international waters. Well, I've worked with Jeff before, but now it was nice to see like the whole picture. So thank you so much. And also the alignment with the Coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. I think it was interesting to see how it is aligned in this in your presentation. So please, for all the participants, please write your questions in the Q&A and we will have a discussion afterwards with Sarah and with all the other panelists. I will move in to introduce our next speaker, Patricia Leon. Patricia is, as I said, Director for Nature Conservation at the Bezos Fund, where she leads global strategies and partnership to advance the 30 by 30 target. She has over 20 years of experience in conservation, including leading major marine and initiatives in the Eastern Tropical Pacific and mobilizing more than 150 million for ocean protection. Her work focuses on scaling innovative financing and building partnerships that connect goals with local impact. So over to you, Patricia. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you, Magdalena, and good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Patricia Leon with the Bezos Earth Fund, and it's great to be here with you this morning. Let me share my presentation. Can you see that? Yeah? Okay, thank you. So I want to talk about financing implementation of Target 3 at scale, and I'm going to be focusing on philanthropy and how there can be philanthropic partnerships with government and multilateral agencies to advance
Sorry,
MPAs.
Patricia, to interrupt you. I don't see your presentation.
You can't see my presentation? Oh, sorry. Let me try again. Can you
Yes, now I can see it.
see it? Let me.
Good presenter mode.
Yeah, can you see it now?
It's great. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I thought everything was well. Okay, so let me keep going. As I was saying, I want to focus today on financing implementation of 30 by 30 at scale. And I'm going to talk about how the Bezos Earth Fund is doing this with a mix of philanthropic, with a collaboration with philanthropy, government, and multilateral agencies. So our approach, we pledged $1 billion to support implementation of Target 3. And I'm pleased to report that we have programmed most of that $1 billion, and we hope to increase our commitment soon. And we basically fund four areas here. One is the feasibility and preparation of MPA proposals. We also fund the designation process. Then we fund active management of new protected areas, but also of existing protected areas. And we fund sustainable financing mechanisms. So we are trying to fund the whole spectrum of Target 3. And we focus not only on marine protected areas, but also OECMs, and 30% of our budget helps secure indigenous peoples and local communities in their approach to Target 3. So it really is a holistic approach towards advancing Target 3. Our footprint, so we decided to focus our funding in a few areas around the world that we chose based on biodiversity and political will to advance towards 30 by 30 at the time when the region was chosen. And as you know, political will shifts. So we started with the tropical Andes and the Congo Basin. We then went to the Eastern Tropical Pacific. We have most of our work in North America is based in Canada, but there's some work in the United States, mostly in advancing existing protections, and our newest region is the Blue Continent. And we do a combination of new protections, strengthening existing protections, and sustainable financial management in all of them. In some of them, we the combination is a little bit different in each region, but mainly those are our 4 strategies. I always get asked if we're gonna add regions. We do that very slowly. So at the time, we don't have plans to add a new region, but we will, we may add 1 or 2 regions in the next couple of years. So I want to focus today on a case study in the Eastern Tropical Pacific and talk about the donor table that we help convene in the ETP in order to generate sustainable funding and to really advance Target 3 in the Central Eastern Tropical Pacific. So that's the piece of the ETP that we have focused our work on. So that's the SEMAR corridor in the ETP. Those areas that you see there in green are large marine protected areas that were created in the last 4 years. So in total, the corridor protects over 600,000 square kilometers. There's also, I'm also showing in yellow, smaller coastal MPAs. And I'm going to talk about those coastal MPAs later. I just wanted to show the relationship here. A lot of the species that are migrating across the corridor start their life cycles in the coastal areas. But our initial strategy focused on increasing protections in the oceanic areas. So key achievement, there's the designation of over 40 million hectares of new marine protected areas. That's a 275% increase in the last 4 years. Panama, Costa Rica, and Colombia have reached 30%. Ecuador is at a little under 20%. And we have been supporting the effective management and working with partners in the ETP donor coalition to secure funding, sustainable funding mechanisms for these oceanic protected areas. So in 2021, after making our commitment to advancing Target 3, we go and after the 4 presidents of these countries came together and said they wanted to significantly advance towards Target 3, we convened a donor coalition, and I'm not going to name all the members of the coalition, but some of them are here as speakers today. So the Jeff and Pew, ourselves, and others that you can see there. And together, in 2022, these organizations pledged $150 million to support these 4 countries in establishing, sustainably managing, and sustainably funding the marine protected areas in the SEMAR corridor. That was the day where we pledged in the UN Ocean Conference in 2022. And you can see there's strong collaboration between this group of diverse funders and the ministers of the 4 countries at the time. So the coalition works in 3 areas: strengthen regional work, so which really is having a governance system that spans beyond one country. The other one is second work stream is the MPA creation and management of so at the now they've been created and you saw in the map the large protected areas, but at the time it was supporting the creation and management, including science, control and surveillance, and other aspects of management. And the third work stream that the coalition agreed to work on was sustainable financing mechanisms. So each partner works on some of them, like ourselves, work on all of the work streams, and other funding partners work on maybe only one of the work streams. But this basically generated a framework where we could collaborate and could make sure that we weren't duplicating efforts, but that we were actually organizing our efforts around these work streams. Recently, in 2025, so every year we have an update of how we're advancing together as a coalition towards the 150 million that we pledged in 2022. And we have actually surpassed the number. We're currently at 165 million invested in the region. And you can see, and we've divided these into the work streams. So most of the funding went into MPA creation and management. 27 million has gone into sustainable financing mechanisms and 20 million into the regional component to make sure that beyond each national management of the MPAs that you have a strengthened regional network. And then 27 million falls somewhere around other that we couldn't place in each of the work streams. So every year we make sure that we keep up, that we're accountable to our pledges as a donor coalition, and that we communicate this very clearly to the governments. In the last 5 years, governments have changed a lot from those original governments that made the commitment. And we think that having these annual, sometimes biannual meetings as a donor coalition with the governments helps sustain political will and political mandate across the years. Of course, it varies. We all know political will varies significantly, especially when you're talking about 4 different countries with 4 different political cycles. But we keep this, we have kept this going through numerous changes in government from the 4 countries. I think I want to reflect on key success points in terms of this donor coalition, which has been able to help many local partners, local NGOs, international NGOs, indigenous communities and indigenous peoples and local communities advance towards this goal by providing funding at an early stage and allowing it to be sustained throughout the last 5 years and hopefully in the next years, because we're establishing sustainable funding mechanisms that should carry forward the management of these areas. So in terms of success points of what has worked in this coalition, I think we identified a common high-level vision to support the countries with their 30 by 30 ambition. We engaged at different levels and keep it useful. So not every partner in this coalition wants to have a monthly meeting. Some partners are okay being informed once, twice a year, meeting only once a year. So we engage at different levels to make sure that the coalition is useful to all the members at the level they want to engage in. We enable co-funding of key initiatives. So we are making sure that we're not funding groups for the same things, but that we can actually stack our funding. So, for example, early on, we identified that philanthropic funding would flow faster than bilateral or multilateral funding would, because the process at the philanthropic level to create a project and approve a project is often faster. So we identified this and used philanthropic funding at the beginning to flow quickly to respond to political ambition. And in the meantime, bilateral and multilateral partners were starting their project preparation processes. And so now, 4 or 5 years into the partnership, you can see that the multilateral and bilateral funding projects have been approved and have arrived, and they have executing agencies, and they will start implementation soon. So the stacking of philanthropic funding with multilateral funding has worked pretty well, I think, in terms of immediate funding and then more long-term funding. We've prevented duplication by active collaboration, and we've helped to maintain interest and political momentum across different changes in government. I think I covered all of the points here, but I wanted to share that in order for these type of coalitions to work, you need to keep it simple, useful, and make it really focused on the ground on how can we be more effective together, and how do we work together with governments in making sure that things are progressing towards the 30x30 outcomes. And now looking to the future, so as I said, protected areas have been created. A lot of initial management has started. They all have management plans. They all have control and surveillance plans. We've invested in initial control and surveillance infrastructure and equipment. And now we're working with all the donor coalition in financial mechanisms. So right now, Ecuador, Pew, one of the partners, worked on a debt restructure that created Galapagos Life Fund, which provides an endowment forever to fund the marine protected areas, the oceanic marine protected areas in Ecuador. Colombia has Herencia Colombia, PFP, that works with marine and terrestrial protected areas. We've supported that along with other members of the coalition. Costa Rica Blue Fund, that's a sinking fund that doesn't have permanence. Some of our grantees are working on the permanence for Costa Rica, but this provides an initial 10 million investment for implementation of the management plans for the protected areas in Costa Rica. And Panama has the COIBA Fund, which is a permanent fund that currently has about $4 million that as an endowment, and it gets entrance fees and other charges that keep it going. So it doesn't depend only on an endowment, but it has annual fees that it collects. And this provides funding for the Coiba National Park and surrounding areas. This is a long-term mechanism, smaller than the other ones, but pretty effective. So we hope these mechanisms, they're not perfect. They still need some work, especially in Costa Rica and Panama. Panama is also working on a PFP, but on a PFP that would cover all protected areas, including the ones that are part of the CEMAR corridor. So this is our plan for the future in terms of ensuring that once the programs from donors end, there's a mechanism in place to keep managing the protected areas in the corridor. We are now, some of the partners in the coalition are now starting to think, okay, what happens with the protected areas on the coastal zones that are part of this ecosystem, and part of the 30% of the countries. And so that's kind of the next phase and the next challenge. And it really is about creating financial mechanisms in those areas. I think I finished on time, Magdalena and Mariano. Thank you very much. And looking forward to talking with, to answering questions and having a discussion at the end.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Well, super. I have many notes here. I wanted to share some of my ideas, but I have many of them. Impressive the amount of funding that this coalition is trying to focus on this corridor. I find interesting also the way that it focused initially on the creation and management, and now designing new mechanisms for this sustainable financing of these areas and with different strategies per country. I have many questions, but I think it will be I will be sharing my questions on the for the from the period that we will have for Q&As. And I think it was interesting to start with this public finance presentation with the Jeff, moving to philanthropic funding. And now, many thanks for the work and for presenting also the experiences and your key, how did you call it? Yeah, the key success or the key points that you could highlight on the work that you guys have done so far. I will leave all my questions for the Q&A period. There are some questions already in the Q&A chat, so if you want, you can, for the panelists, you can start responding, but we will have a discussion afterwards. I will move in to share, to open the dialogue with Pew. We have two guests from Pew that will be sharing their experiences so far with Chile and Indonesia. We have Neil Inamdar, who is a sustainable finance senior advisor at the Pew Charitable Trust with over 25 years in capital market and sustainable finance. And we also have Maximiliano Sepúlveda, an old friend. He's a senior officer at Pew supporting the Pantanal Gran Chaco initiative and Enduring Earth in Latin America, working on conservation finance and protected area strategies across the region. So it's my pleasure to give the floor to Max and Neil and to learn more about the Indonesian and Chilean case studies. Well, over to you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Magdalena. And it's great also to have an opportunity to learn from some of the other speakers and to see some of the questions. So I'll start. Max and I work together at Pew. Let me just share my screen here. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Great. I joined Pew about a little bit over a year ago now. And a big part of our focus really is around building out the sustainable finance components. To Patricia's point, with the pre-funding that has flowed to many of these geographies, the question on long-term financing becomes more important. And that's really what we've been focusing on. We're a small team, but we're part of a fairly large organization, and you've probably seen our footprint in various places. So quickly, briefly, just a little bit of background in terms of Pew, both in terms of being a nonprofit, but also a foundation, and really focused on using evidence to inform public policy. In our case, tied around the environmental work and tied around the financing work. There's a US as well as an international portfolio looking at three major pillars: global threats, marine resources, terrestrial and freshwater habitats. There's three big alliances that Pew is a part of. The Pew Bitterelli Ocean Legacy, which some of you may have heard. And again, there's overlap with ETP, the Southern Ocean, the Western Pacific. There's the Blue Nature Alliance. We're working also with the GEF and CI, Minderoo, and others. And some of the target geographies that we've discussed are common to this. And there's the Enduring Earth Project, which is where the PFPs fit in. And in fact, I'm in Panama right now, where we're working on the Panamanian PFP with the Panamanian government and ANCON and others. The reason that So that's just a very quick overview in terms of Pew. I was going to share, or I was asked to share some of the experiences that I had in Indonesia. That was not as part of the Pew work, but because it informs much of the context that we are working on in these other countries. So this is work that I actually did for the World Bank, but also alongside the BNA folks, CI and others who were engaged there, as was WCS and WWF, looking at how to advance some of this work. And then I'll transition over to Max, who will talk about some of the experiences in Chile, where just this year they issued a 1.5 billion euro sustainability linked bond tied to the 30 by 30 targets. And that's the first of its kind that we were able to collaborate on. Quickly, briefly, the reality of Indonesia, it's a very large economy. It is financially very sophisticated. There is a well-engaged community around this space in the impact space. And there's also significant government interest, at least in the previous administration, around blue finance. However, when we did do this work, what we found was that these efforts were mostly standalone. They were not coordinated. And most, if not all, would benefit from an enhanced policy and enabling environment conditions that would improve scalability. Also, they didn't address the costs associated with the commons, which is really what protected areas are, that could be addressed at scale. So while we found development bank initiatives or NGOs or even insurance initiatives, we still had a problem with protected areas being financed at scale. And the question was how we could potentially address that. We essentially took, to Sarah's point, more of a whole of government approach, working with the bank. This is with the World Bank. First, in terms of really understanding the risks, documenting those risks, being clear about what those risks were, bringing forward a lot of the research and science into a cohesive message that could be addressed to the whole of government. And then secondly, a real clear understanding around the business case for the Ministry of Finance and for policymakers to invest in these ecosystems. One of the things we've consistently seen in different geographies is that while there's an appreciation from the maritime economy, the numbers typically, as they relate to the importance and significance, are very spread out. They're not clearly understood. And there isn't a clear business case in many countries for this investment. And that's one of the big focal areas that the World Bank and others engaged with to build that case for the Ministry of Finance in Indonesia. So the bank issued the Oceans for Prosperity report, and then we wrote up the Blue Finance Policy Note, which sought to bring together both the theory from the science side, but also the policy interventions and the financial implications that finance policymakers could address. The government then integrated this into their SDG government security framework, which is essentially their sustainable finance strategy. And in addition to that, developed the Blue Finance Policy Note, the Blue Finance Instrument Development Guideline, which provided them and their financial teams in the Ministry of Finance with a range of options that had been vetted and approved by government. So the Ministry of National Planning published this document, which was then endorsed so that essentially the bureaucracy could be comfortable moving down this channel. As a consequence, three instruments or three approaches were then launched. The LATRA project, which was the bank's project with the government in collaboration with ProBlue, that raised about 200 million for protected areas. The government itself issued a series of blue notes, which I'll just run through very quickly. And then hopefully this year at some point, there'll be a non-sovereign instrument, which is the Coral Bond, which was designed based on the Rhino bond. And I know our colleagues at Jeff are familiar with that. In essence, the LATRA project was focused on the tragedy of the commons and the lack of capacity in protected areas. And that layered on with the blue bond that the Ministry of Finance issued, which was one of the first ones in the world at very favorable terms. A key piece of this, and I'm just conscious of time because I need to make sure my colleague Max has time, was understanding the uses of proceeds, whether it was in marine protected areas, fisheries, coastal infrastructure, MSMEs, and the sources of proceeds. So the sources of capital that would be eligible or could be used, and really being clear about how those could be deployed. We found that this is one of the big gaps, is understanding how to allocate resources to the appropriate uses. I'll just skip over the channeling piece. We can come back to this in terms of questions. Finally, there is a plan that was developed to issue a coral bond, which is still being processed. I understand at some point this year that should be issued, but really it should be stressed that this was only possible based on those preconditions being addressed and based on those investments made by the government. The coral bond by itself would not have been possible without those initial conditions. So key lessons learned with the enabling conditions, the capacity constraints with coordination at the national level. The analytics really matter, especially with the Ministry of Finance. They have their own language, and the ability to translate our environmental goals into their language is absolutely crucial. Aligning the mechanisms with the uses of capital. Obviously, we were not going to try to allocate private capital from private equity into operating a marine park. Those are very differently aligned capital. And then making sure we've got the financing architecture in place. I will stop there. I will be happy to address questions, but as part of my transition, let me please hand it over to Max.
Thanks, Neil. I will be sharing in just a second. Please hold on. Please let me know if my screen has been shared. You should be seeing a PowerPoint. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Let me put this in presentation mode. Just one sec. Okay. So first, thanks to the previous presenters, to my colleague Neil and Magdalena for inviting us to present this initiative. As I want to give first the credits to the Minister of Finance in Chile and the Minister of Environment with the support of CONAF for this initiative and also content of the presentation. CONAF is the acronym for, sorry, is the equivalent to the National Park Service in Chile that these days is being transferred to a new institution named the Biodiversity and Protected Area Service. And sorry for those that are fans of the MPAs, but I will be bringing the terrestrial part of this initiative and the idea, and thanks Magda for innovating here, is to bring other things that are happening in a different ecosystems that probably are useful or inspirational for the work in the MPAs. This is also a new thing in general, and we would like to share not only the results, but also a little bit of the history of this initiative that started with the invitation of the Ministry of Finance to collaborate in the upgrade of the Chile's sustainability-linked bond framework during the last year. And a little bit of history and background from Chile. Chile is being a leader on sustainable finances, as you can see here in this graph. And they has been investing in depth in ESG instruments since 2019 in an increasing way that today is achieving almost 40% of their total debt. And you can see in the lower part the different instruments that they are using. So they are, I would say, experts on this. And also they are they have a good reputation in terms of not only credibility, but also innovation. As you can see, they were the first ones in issuing SLV in the world on 2022. They also including elements for gender KPIs in 2023. They started with the classic ones in terms of KPIs related to climate change, such as greenhouse emissions. You can see here the specific KPIs and targets defined. Also increasing the non-conventional renewables energy. And lately, the one related to gender in terms of the 40% female representation on corporate boards. And so this means that we are in a context where the Ministry of Finance were not only leading, but also open to innovate and to integrate their debt policies into international commitments, such as the work we did last year in connection with biodiversity and Target 3. And first, I wanted to clarify, and this is something that also was new for me, because what is the difference and what is specifically a sustainable linked bond, or SLB of the acronym? So first is an outcome linked debt instrument. And as a difference from green bonds, our SLBs are tied to performance targets that are called KPIs. So not specific projects, okay? As the ones that we were talking before. So this is probably a little bit different and curious, right? So, but it builds incentives also, which are called step up or step downs. So basically, if you achieve a specific target or KPI, your interest rate will change depending on the fitness of these KPIs. Most other instruments don't directly affect cost of capital. They are flexible in terms of the use of proceeds. So funds can be used for general purposes. This is sovereign money, basically. And unlike green bonds, which are earmarked, they have a system level impact. And I think this is the most relevant and innovative, I would say, which aligns national policies on finance. So basically is bringing or having ministers of finance in the table where they are normally not, right, from the conservation perspective. So unlike payment for ecosystem services or trust funds or PFPs that are normally project or program based, securing that the funds are used in the uses that are defined by the project. So some key highlights is that for this specific one is that it is connected with biodiversity in terms of the Coming Montreal framework. The NDC is committed by the country. It was developed in the collaboration of the institutions that I mentioned before, and it has a dual component. The first one is almost a classic one, that is expanding protection, such as surface in this case, the typical 30% surface. And the novel one probably is that we also added the quality of the protection, so the effective management aspect. So in our case, we will invite it to also endorse this initiative in the way that we believe that is a credible and pragmatic approach to measure Chile progress towards the terrestrial components of the 30 by 30 goal. So these are the two ways of verifying these KPIs. One is also well known, is protected planets, where each country is submitting and reporting their protected area cover by specific protected areas. So they have all the process to verifying data, and they are internal in-country processes to secure that this information is also auditable and is basically a process that is clear. And the second one will require an external assurance that will be assuring the report will be included annually. Okay, I'm going for also some innovative component of this is that they will be using a coupon for a step up. So I mean, a penalty if they don't achieve the 30% goal. So sorry, I forgot to mention that today Chile is around 21% of land cover. So as you can see, it's ambitious because in less than 4 years we need to increase a third of the current protected areas cover. And the second one is if the first one is achieved, it will have an incentive. The interest rate will be reduced. So it's an innovative way because it's a dual component of structuring this SLB. This is more details on the components. I already mentioned the land cover protection. This is the target. And this is the content of the effective management. How this was simplified by the typical components of governance, planning, staff, and monitoring systems that needs to be in place, all of them in each protected area to be counted, that specific surveys, and being adding to the total sum of achieving at least 10% of the total country. So today, just to give you some idea, the situation of this is less than 1% maybe, but each of the elements, they have the independent progress. But as I said before, all the elements needs to be met simultaneously to achieve this effective management KPI component. And also the second party opinion provided that it is incredible, impactful, aligned with the sustainability linked bonds from principles from ICMA, which is an institution that defines the standards for SLDs. And it got the best scores in terms of KPI technical strength and also ambitiousness. As I mentioned before, in less than 4 years, there is a high ambition to be achieved for Chile. Finally, this framework was published on July 2025, and around 6 months. So this year, on January, Chile finally issued this SLD with about 1.5 billion euros, as Neil was introducing. So we are very happy and proud that Chile is not only leading in the framework, but also is issuing and making this actually a result. I just pasted here some of the news that were commenting this successful initiative, the rate that they were achieving because of the number of investors interested, some comments from the Chilean former minister today, Maisa Rojas, indicating that this is tremendously innovative, as is the first directly linked to structure biodiversity to the target tree. So it's a whole initiative that probably can be expanded, as I said before, to MPAs. I want to thanks with this picture also that is showing part of the Chile's landscapes that we are interested in not only protecting but also improving the management. And I thought it was a good image because it's also showing how the terrestrial ecosystems through the rivers and glaciers we have in Chile connect with the sea, in this case of the fjords of Patagonia. So in some way also inspires you for expanding this initiative to other places. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Neil and Max. It was very interesting to move forward from the JEF, public finance, to philanthropy, here to some instruments like working directly with the ministries of finance. Something that we saw in our presentation was the focus on, and in particular on this one, that Max was showing this particular instrument on terrestrial protected areas that could be implemented in the future, hopefully in some other countries for marine protected areas. The focus that we need to think on, not only on designing, but also for the financial sustainability on the governance, management, effective management. I cannot read my own notes, but we need to think on all the elements that need to be financed for sustaining these areas, taking into account the political will that is changing and taking into account the different elements of managing these areas. I found super interesting the case of Indonesia and Chile, how the work with the Ministry of Finance are supporting the sustainable financing for these areas. Great ideas on how to think on a long-term financing for marine protected areas. We will move, well, thank you so much again, all presenters, great presentation. We were very lucky to have great speakers as always, but today in particular was fascinating. So thank you, Patricia, Neil, Sarah, Max. We will move into our questions and answer period. We have several questions. I know that some of you have already started responding the Q&A session. Great questions. So we will start with that. So maybe we will start with the question to Patricia. So with those 150 millions that, among other things, support sustainable finance. Which financial solutions specifically are you supporting in CMAR, and how are they being implemented effectively across jurisdictions? Or have you fostered these financial solutions at the national scale?
Thank you, Magdalena, and thanks for the question. In CEMAR, we're building a country-specific financing mechanism. So we've supported, along with other members of the donor coalition, country-specific financing mechanisms tailored to the context of each country, but aligned across the region. So, as I said before, Ecuador worked on a conservation trust fund funded through a debt restructuring that provides funding for Hermandad and the Galapagos Reserve. Colombia is implementing a PFP that's national in scale, but will provide funding to the 3 MPAs that are part of the CEMAR corridor in Colombia. Sorry, 4 MPAs that are part of the CEMAR corridor in Colombia. Costa Rica has the Blue Fund to finance Cocos and Bicentenario. This, and I saw like the follow-up question to this, this is the only sync fund. So this has a 2030 kind of expiry date. And in the meantime, so it's providing $10 million across 7 years. It finishes in 2030. And in the meantime, we have partners like Rewild and the Asociación Costa Rica por Siempre working on a solution that will provide permanent funding once the current sync fund is finished, basically. And so I don't have an answer right now of what that will be, but there are 2 organizations working together, exploring alternatives. In the case of Panama, Panama has the COIVA Fund. It's supported by tourism and entrance fees in addition to philanthropic donations. That is not a sync fund, that's a long-term fund. And in addition to that, Pew is working on a PFP for Panama. We and other donors of the coalition are interested in observing how that PFP design moves forward, and would be keen to support the PFP depending on how the design comes out. And then at the same time, Pew is advancing a regional PFP to cover the added costs of managing a corridor across boundaries, right? So each national mechanism covers kind of specific costs for those MPAs, but then there's an additional layer of costs that are more about regional coordination and management across a corridor. And those would be funded through a first of its kind regional PFP. So the model is layered national systems reinforced by a regional mechanism, ensuring that the corridor and its pieces are funded and managed at scale.
Great, thank you so much, Patricia. I have a question here for Neil. Who are the outcome payers for the Coral Bond?
Hi. So just because nothing has been officially formally announced, the best way to kind of capture that is there's a combination of public and private philanthropic donors that have been engaged on this in order to provide those outcome payers, the payments. I know that once there'll be hopefully there'll be a public announcement in the next couple of months that I'll be able to share that. And I'd rather at this point, just respecting confidentiality, we don't want to announce or promote anything where we are with that.
Okay.
But there are outcome payers who are essentially very credible, and that's a critical component for the private markets in order to be assured that their deferred interest, which is essentially how that model works, will be paid to them should the targets be attained. So the credibility of the outcome payers is is incredibly important to the design of these instruments. And if you look at the Rhino bond, where the Jeff was one of the anchor outcome payers and participants in this, they provided a lot of credibility to that instrument. And that was the kind of situation that we were looking to replicate when we designed this.
Sure. Okay, great. This question goes to Sarah. So Claudia Silva is asking, like from the perspective where when marine protected area has no funding, what would you recommend to marine protected area managers and allies to work on to be able to move towards sustainable finance from the bottom up? Like she's asking if there is important to develop a business plan at the MPA level or MPA cluster level, or of any use of is strategic to start from the bottom up to being able to get long-term financial funding.
I have a feeling there are probably other people on this call who are going to be better able to answer this question. So, but I think there are a wide variety of potential sources of funding. Patricia and I were just at another meeting, and we were definitely emphasizing the fact that it's kind of I would say, unfortunately, for those working on the ground, it's a bit of a puzzle to put together to say that, but to know that there's multilateral funding that's going to be probably slower and more focused on institutions. Someone else in the questions was asking about, support to governments, and that's something that Jeff can do. While, the philanthropies and others may be able to move more quickly, more in kind of potentially more focused ways, or more in this like long-term strategic thing where they can commit. For us, it's really talking to the government and to the broader Parks Administration. And, we're going to encourage that there are national plans and national approaches to conservation finance, because we see that if you try to do everything protected area, like individual protected area or cluster by cluster, that you're going to leave folks out, and that you're kind of just in the same position that for another protected area 5 years from now than you are now in one. So if we're really looking for these kind of bigger and more strategic approaches that hopefully can kind of lift all boats at the same time, rather than trying to just focus on one or another. But I would happily turn this over to others on the call.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Well, maybe link to other questions to all panelists. I know that, Sarah, you already responded to this question from Maria Antonova. But in terms of the tools, the instruments, and the strategies that were presented today, Maria is asking for challenges and opportunities around marine OECMs versus traditional MPAs. I know that this webinar is focused on MPAs, but I think it's interesting also to think how these instrument tools and strategies could be implemented, or what are the takeaways or lessons for the OECM financing experience, that if anyone could share an experience or thoughts on this.
I'm just quiet because we haven't funded a lot of marine OECMs yet. So I don't have good. We've done much more with OECMs on land than on the ocean. So I don't have great insight in terms of marine OECMs. We are working on a few new examples. So hopefully, if you ask me this question in a few months, we will have more to share. But so far, MPAs have been a big focus of our marine work.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Please, to all panelists, please help me responding to the Q&A in the chat. That will help, because we won't have much time. I will go with final question, and so So Brent can have some time for the closing remarks and announcement. For Neil, with blue financing option established in Indonesia, what do you see as the primary blockers for deploying this financing at true scale? Are policy gaps the core, or is it, it was moved. I cannot see the question anymore. Or is it more cost in the better management, which you mentioned, as it may relate to the tech adoption?
Thanks. I guess to some extent, there is a little bit of a chicken and egg there in that question. It's always important to understand what your use of proceeds are and to be the most efficient and effective in those use of proceeds over time. And frankly, that information will be critical to engage with policymakers, especially in Ministry of Finance, because they want to know what funds are going to be used for. So there's no point in just saying we need $100 million for protected areas. But what do you need it for and over what period of time? So from a project management perspective, that's critical. However, even if you have all of that and you don't have the right enabling conditions, the sustainable finance framework doesn't exist or it doesn't allow these types of instruments, it will not be possible to raise those funds from public sources. So they are parallel tracks that need to be followed in order to really deploy capital at scale. One is on the policy front and the enabling conditions and what I call the preconditions for issuance. And then there's the project-related activities, which are really aligned with costs, cost allocations, timing, impact, and KPIs. And one thing I would also highlight is I think there's a real opportunity to link good KPIs, good metrics to good KPIs, which can then be used to incentivize or encourage instruments. As you saw from that example that Max presented, we went through a long process of trying to identify relevant KPIs based on good data. And I think that's a real opportunity for the scientific community.
Well, great recommendation, great closing. Thank you, Neil. Well, it's the moment to turn to our colleague and great partner on this community of practice, Brent, that is gonna give the closing remarks and some announcements. So over to you, Brent. Thank you. And thank you all, Sarah, Neil, Max, Patricia. Thank you all for the great presentations. So over to you, Brent.
Thanks, Magdalena, and I won't take too long, but I do want to also thank our panelists, and we have sought for some time with the CBD to create opportunities for exchange of experience and ideas, and we're quite frankly looking for more and more dynamic ways of doing that. So we're very open to suggestions. We want to promote and accelerate implementation of the target through these kinds of exchanges. There aren't really a lot of announcements per se, but WCPA does work by looking at experience in various fields and distilling that into global guidance. So we do have, I've put into the chat some links to, there is a new good practice guidance on conservation area, on protected and conserved area finance. That's not specific to marine protected areas, but you will find stuff in there. There's also a new online course on finance that some folks may find useful, and of course our curated guidance on Target 3 overall. I would mention that the 6th International Marine Protected Area Congress is coming up a year from now, and we hope that that will have a strong finance component to it. And then just a few comments based on what I heard, and I am not an expert in finance of conservation areas, but I would underscore, I think, perhaps an obvious point, we wanted this to focus on implementation. And I think it's great that Target 3 has raised ambition, but there is an overfocus on the 30%, the area target, and creating new conservation areas. Paper parks are not entirely useless, but close to it. As Sarah said, we can do a lot by making existing areas effective. And I increasingly wish that the 30% number was also had with it a specific call for 100% effectiveness or something close to it. We're lacking that in the overall mentality of what the target is about. You heard many instances about blended finance, which I take to mean not just single direct cash grants, but other things that contribute to the overall cause. Coordination across multiple types of donors, even different funds within the same organization or multilateral agencies. Those of us who are sort of management practitioners maybe lose that nuance, and it's good to be reminded of that. And I think everybody talked about supporting the full spectrum of needs. Thus, when seeking international funding, one may need to pursue several pathways to find support and having multiple sources. COVID taught us the folly of overdependence on single sources of income, such as tourism, and the dissolution of USAID was another wake-up call that we need more sustainable financing for conservation area implementation. We heard about debt for nature swaps and projects for permanence and similar schemes. And while these instruments should restrict use of funding, we were reminded that political will waxes and wanes. Certainly, financial capacity among parties to the CBD ranges widely, but we should not neglect the responsibility of governments to their own conservation areas from their own resources. MPA managers and practitioners need to better document the value and benefits of public finance for implementation of Target 3, as we heard from the Blue Finance example from Indonesia. And finally, I'm encouraged to hear about all this innovation in sustainable finance for implementation. It helps to restore hope. So back to you, Magdalena.
I agree that it helps to restore hope. Thank you for closing with that. Just to close, the recording of this webinar will be available in our website. I will be sending the link to all participants of this webinar. And for panelists and participants from the community of practice, if you want to share documents, the presentations, or any other information relevant to this webinar, please send it to me so I can distribute it to all the participants of this webinar afterwards by email. So please share tools, strategies, documents, case studies that you can have on marine protected areas that we can share by email afterwards. So thank you all. Thank you for tuning in. We will be having more webinars this year on different topics. So please keep in touch for the news. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day, afternoon, evening. Bye.
Thank you, Magdalena. Bye, all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Patricia. Great presentations.